You know, out here on my 10-acre Texas ranch, I figured the toughest challenge would be a busted gate or a horse too stubborn to move. Never in a million years did I think the Homeowners Association, those folks obsessed with perfect lawns and mailbox shades, would turn my life upside down. They picked my private horse barn for their lavish summer party. No permission asked. And trust me, they never saw it coming when my grandpa, the county sheriff, stepped in to set things straight. Before we dive in, hit that like button to support this wild ride. Thanks for being awesome. It all started on my ranch, just outside a little town in Texas. My spread isn't some sprawling cattle empire, but it's a good chunk of land. 10 acres of rolling pasture, dotted with live oaks, where my 5 purebred horses, Blaze, Thunder, Star, Rusty, and Belle, graze and run. I've owned this place for 20 years. Long before the Silver Spur Estates, a shiny new subdivision popped up nearby. Those houses with their perfect lawns and matching mailboxes brought the HOA. And with the HOA came Karen. Karen was the new HOA president, a woman with a blonde bob so stiff it could survive a Texas tornado, a voice that could make a longhorn wince, and a white SUV that screamed, "I need to speak to the manager." She took over about 6 months ago and decided my ranch, a piece of old Texas with its weathered barn and honest dirt, was a blemish on her vision of suburban perfection. Now, my barn isn't some rundown shed. It's a solid, cedar-built structure, red with white trim, like something out of a postcard. Inside, it's all business. Hay bales stacked neat, tools hung on the walls, and space for my horses when the weather turns or I need to rotate their pasture. It smells of alfalfa, leather, and hard work. Not exactly the vibe for a gala with fairy lights and champagne flutes. But Karen, she had other ideas. The trouble started on a sunny Saturday morning. I was sipping coffee on my porch, watching Blaze kick up dust in the corral, when Karen's SUV rolled up my gravel drive. She stepped out, all smiles with her sidekick, Carl, trailing behind. Carl's a twitchy guy, always looking like he's apologizing for existing. "Jake," Karen called, her voice sweet as pecan pie, but with an edge that set my teeth on end. "We're planning the Silver Spur Summer Gala, a real classy event to bring the community together. And your charming barn? It's just perfect for an authentic, rustic venue." I nearly spit out my coffee. A gala? In my barn? I could just picture it. 100 city folks in their Sunday best, tripping over hay bales, dodging horse manure, and complaining about the smell. "Karen," I said, keeping my tone polite but firm, "I appreciate the thought, but the barn's a working space. It's got livestock, equipment, and it's not safe for public events. Insurance alone would be a nightmare. So no, it's not happening." Her smile didn't budge, but her eyes turned cold, like bluebonnets under frost. "Oh, Jake, don't you worry. We'll handle cleanup, and our event insurance covers everything. It'd be such a gesture of community spirit." Carl nodded like a bobblehead, his glasses slipping down his nose. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Karen, let me be clear. The barn's private property. It's not available. You'll need to find another spot in town, somewhere more appropriate." Her lips tightened into a thin line. "Well," she said, her voice sharp now, "we'll see about that. Jake, community spirit matters around here." She spun on her heels, Carl scurrying after her. Her SUV peeled out, kicking up gravel like a toddler throwing a tantrum. I shook my head, a knot forming in my gut. Karen wasn't the type to take no for an answer. She saw it as a personal challenge. I made a mental note to double-check the locks on my gates and barn doors. People like her don't just back off. Sure enough, a few days later, I found the HOA's monthly newsletter in my mailbox. I'm not even a member, mind you, but there it was. And right there, in bold print, Silver Spur Summer Gala at the historic Thompson barn. I stared at it, dumbfounded. They weren't just ignoring me. They were advertising it, like my refusal was just a speed bump they'd rolled right over. My blood boiled. I'm a patient man. I've dealt with sick horses, busted tractors, and Texas storms that'd make you pray for mercy. But this was war. They were acting like my ranch, my barn, my life's work was theirs to commandeer. I grabbed my phone and dialed the HOA office. Straight to voicemail, of course. Karen's chirpy message about Silver Spur's community values made my stomach churn. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this is Jake Thompson. My barn is not available for your gala." I said no, and I meant it. It's private property. Retract that announcement and find another venue. Any attempt to use my barn is trespassing. I hung up, knowing it was probably pointless. Karen wasn't going to listen to reason. She was too busy playing queen of her suburban kingdom. But I needed it on record, just in case. The next few days were like a bad movie. Carl's beige sedan started creeping past my property, slow as a snake eyeing a mouse. One afternoon, while I was fixing a gate, I caught Karen parked just beyond my fence line, snapping photos of the barn with her phone, like she was planning a heist. I gave her a big, not-so-friendly wave. She sped off, but the message was clear. They were moving forward, my objections be damned. I wasn't just going to get mad. I was going to get smart. My grandpa, Sheriff Amos Thompson, taught me a thing or two about standing your ground. He's been the law in this county for 30 years, a tough but fair man who doesn't tolerate nonsense. I knew if push came to shove, he'd have my back, but I wasn't ready to call him in yet. I had a plan forming, and it didn't involve a showdown. Not yet. First, I documented everything. Saved the newsletter, wrote down the date, time, and content of my voicemail. Noted every time Carl's car or Karen's SUV slunk by. I even snapped a few photos of Karen's little photo session. Evidence is king, Grandpa always said. Next, I brushed up on Texas property law. No surprise there. My ranch was mine, and the HOA had zero authority to force me to host their party. If they trespassed, they'd be in deep trouble. And if someone got hurt tripping over a pitchfork or spooked by a horse, that'd be on them, not me, as long as I secured my property. Then there was the matter of my horses. Blaze, Thunder, Star, Rusty, and Belle. 5 purebreds, each a beauty, each weighing over 1,000 pounds. They're gentle, mostly, but they're not pets. They're working animals, and their presence in the barn would make any uninvited guest think twice. I was due to move them into the barn anyway, to rotate their pasture. Normally, I'd lock them in their stalls if I was leaving town. But if they were just in the main barn area, well, that wasn't my fault if someone broke in. See, I had a trip planned. Every year, I visit Grandpa Amos for a weekend. It's a 3-hour drive to his place, where we swap stories, grill steaks, and maybe what a fishing line. I'd had on my calendar for months. The HOA's party just happened to fall on that same weekend. Pure coincidence. Or maybe fate. My plan was simple. I'd secure the barn, lock it up tight, and leave for my trip. The horses would be safe inside, with food and water. If Karen and her crew decided to break in, they'd meet 5 very large, very curious horses. And I'd be miles away, sipping a beer with Grandpa. Untouchable. I started prepping the barn. The main doors are heavy cedar, secured with a steel padlock outside and a thick beam inside. I oiled the lock, made sure it clicked shut like a vault. The side door had 2 old bolt locks I neglected for years. I spent an afternoon cleaning them, oiling the mechanisms, testing them. Thunk, thunk, solid as a rock. That door wasn't opening without a crowbar and a whole lot of noise. The high windows? Latched tight, unreachable without a ladder. The barn was a fortress. My horses would be safe, my property secure. I wasn't setting a trap. I was just being a responsible rancher. The day before their so-called gala, my neighbor Mabel called. She's a sweet old lady who keeps an eye on the neighborhood gossip. "Jake," she whispered like she was passing state secrets. I heard Karen at the mailbox. She was bragging to Carl about a workaround for your barn. Something about a key from the old owner. I grinned. The previous owner was long gone, and I'd replaced every lock when I bought the place. Karen was walking into a mess of her own making. "Thanks, Mabel," I said. "Keep me posted." The morning of the gala, I went about my chores, fed the chickens, watered the garden, led the horses into the barn's main area. I spread fresh hay, filled their water trough, and tossed in some extra alfalfa. Blaze snorted, happy as could be. The others followed, settling in like they owned the place, which in a way, they did. Then I locked up, The main door slid shut with a satisfying rumble. I dropped the beam inside, clicked the padlock outside. The side door got its double bolts. I checked every window, every latch. The barn was sealed tighter than a bank safe. I loaded my truck, fishing rod, tackle box, cooler full of drinks and sandwiches. Anyone seeing me would think, "There's Jake, off to see his grandpa." I waved to a passing neighbor, climbed in, and hit the road. As I drove, I pictured Karen's face when she found the barn locked, her smug confidence turning to fury. I chuckled, turned up the radio, and settled in for the drive. Whatever happened next, it wasn't my problem. I'd done my part. The horses, the barn, and maybe a certain sheriff would handle the rest. The morning of the HOA's so-called gala was picture perfect. Blue skies, a warm breeze rustling the live oaks, and me, cruising down the highway toward Grandpa's place. My truck's radio was blaring some George Strait, and I had a cooler full of cold drinks and sandwiches in the back. 3 hours from home, I was already feeling the calm of being away from Karen's nonsense. But back at the ranch, things were about to get wild. I wasn't there, of course, but thanks to my neighbor Mabel and a few other folks who love a good story, I got a play-by-play later. And let me tell you, it was better than any soap opera. Picture this, Karen, in a bright pink dress that screamed, "Look at me," rolling up to my ranch with her HOA posse. There was Carl, her nervous sidekick, clutching a clipboard like it was his lifeline. A catering van followed, along with a pickup hauling a DJ sound system. They had balloons, streamers, and enough folding tables to outfit a church picnic. They pulled up to the barn, all smug and confident, ready to transform my working horse stable into their rustic chic gala venue. Karen probably had visions of Instagram-worthy photos, with her posing in front of hay bales like some suburban cowgirl. But when it got to barn's main doors, they hit a wall. Literally. The heavy cedar doors were shut tight, secured with my steel padlock. Mabel, watching from her kitchen window down the road, said she could hear Karen's voice from half a mile away. "This is outrageous," she shrieked. "He can't just lock us out. This is a community event." Carl, ever the yes man, was nodding and muttering about checking the newsletter. The caterers, meanwhile, were unloading trays of finger sandwiches, looking confused. The DJ was fiddling with his equipment, probably wondering why he'd taken this gig. Karen wasn't about to give up. She marched around to the side door, the one I'd bolted shut with those newly oiled steel locks. Mabel said Karen was rattling the handle like it owed her money. "There's got to be a key," she snapped, digging through her purse. She was banking on that old rumor about a master key from the previous owner. "Sorry, Karen. I changed those locks 20 years ago." That door wasn't budging. The group spent a good 20 minutes circling the barn, peering through dusty windows, their voices getting louder and shriller. Mabel said it was like watching a pack of city folks trying to solve a puzzle they didn't understand. Finally, someone, probably Carl, desperate to please, spotted a small ventilation shutter up high on the barn wall. It was latched, but not as heavy-duty as the doors. Now, here's where it gets good. They didn't have a ladder, but one of the HOA volunteers, a guy named Steve who'd clearly been roped into this mess, ran to a neighbor's shed and borrowed one without asking. They propped it up, and a skinny teenager, some poor kid volunteering for community service hours, was hoisted up to the shutter. With a crowbar and some effort, he pried it open and squeezed through, landing in a pile of hay inside. The kid unbolted the side door from the inside, and the HOA crew cheered like they just won the lottery. Karen led the charge, strutting into the barn with her clipboard and her dreams of HOA glory. The caterers followed, carrying trays. The DJ hauled in his speakers. They were in victory, or so they thought. Then they saw them. My horses. Blaze, Thunder, Star, Rusty, and Belle. 5 purebreds, each over 1,000 pounds, standing in the middle of the barn's main area. Blaze, the lead stallion, snorted and tossed his head, his mane catching the dim light. Thunder pawed the ground, kicking up straw. The others just stared, their big brown eyes sizing up these loud, colorful intruders. Mabel said the silence lasted about 3 seconds before all hell broke loose. Karen let out a scream that could have shattered glass. "What are these animals doing here?" she yelled, clutching her pearls, figuratively, but I wouldn't put it past her to have actual pearls. The caterers froze, trays wobbling. The DJ dropped his speaker with a thud. Carl just stood there, mouth open, looking like he wanted to disappear. The horses weren't aggressive. They're well-trained, calm animals, but they're not used to strangers barging into their space, waving balloons and shouting. Blaze took a step forward, curious, and that was enough to send one of the caterers sprinting for the door. A tray of mini quiches hit the floor, scattering across the straw. Thunder, startled by the noise, let out a loud whinny, and that set off Star, who started pacing. Karen, in full panic mode, started yelling orders. "Get these beasts out. This is supposed to be a gala." But nobody was volunteering to move a 1,000-pound horse. Steve, the ladder guy, tried to shoo Rusty toward a stall, waving his arms like a windmill. Rusty just snorted and turned away, unimpressed. Belle, the mare, decided it was a great time to munch on a streamer that had fallen to the floor. The scene, according to Mabel, was pure chaos. Balloons were popping as they snagged on tools. The DJ was frantically trying to save his equipment from getting trampled. Karen was screaming about sabotage and that awful rancher. And the horses? They were just being horses, snorting, stomping, and occasionally nudging the intruders, wondering if they had any treats. That's when my neighbor, old Mr. Jenkins, decided enough was enough. He'd been watching from his porch, annoyed that Steve had taken his ladder without asking. He picked up his phone and called the sheriff's office. "Got some folks trespassing at Jake Thompson's ranch," he said. "They're in his barn, making a mess. You might want to send someone." Now, Mr. Jenkins didn't know it, but the deputy on duty that day was out on another call. So the call got patched through to Grandpa Amos himself. Grandpa was at the station, finishing some paperwork, when he got the message. He raised an eyebrow, recognizing my name, and grabbed his hat. "I'll handle this," he told the dispatcher. Back at the barn, Karen was still trying to salvage her gala. She'd sent Carl to grab more volunteers from the subdivision, thinking they could somehow herd the horses out. But before they could make any more bad decisions, a sheriff's truck rolled up my driveway, lights flashing. Grandpa Amos stepped out, all 6'2" of him, his badge gleaming and his Stetson tilted just right. Mabel said it was like a scene from a Western. Grandpa strode toward the barn, his boots crunching on the gravel. The HOA crew didn't notice him at first, too busy arguing and dodging horses. But when he stepped through the open side door, his voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "What in the Sam Hill is going on here?" Karen spun around, her face going from red to white in a heartbeat. "Sheriff," she stammered, this is a community event. We're using this barn for our gala." Grandpa's eyes narrowed. "This is Jake Thompson's barn, my grandson's barn, and last I checked, he didn't give anybody permission to be here." The barn went quiet, except for the soft snorting of the horses. Carl dropped his clipboard. The caterers backed toward the door. Even the DJ stopped fiddling with his gear. Karen, though, wasn't ready to back down. "Sheriff, this is a misunderstanding. The newsletter said—" "I don't care what your newsletter said," Grandpa interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Jay called me 2 weeks ago. Told me, he said no to this nonsense. This is private property, ma'am. You're trespassing. And from the looks of that pried-open shutter, you've damaged his property too." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. We thought we had a key from the old owner." Grandpa didn't even blink. "That shutter's got prime marks. That's forced entry. You want to explain that to a judge?" The HOA crew started murmuring, looking for exits. Steve, the ladder guy, tried to slip out, but Grandpa fixed him with a stare. "Son, you stay right there. We're going to talk about that ladder you took." Mabel, still watching from her window, said she had to sit down to keep from laughing. Karen was unraveling, her perfect gala in ruins. The horses, sensing the tension, started getting restless again. Blaze let out a loud neigh, and that was enough to send Carl bolting for the door, tripping over a hay bale on his way out. Grandpa turned to the group. "Here's what's going to happen. You're all leaving. Now, take your balloons, your sandwiches, and your DJ, and get off this property. If I hear about you trying this again, you'll be dealing with a lot more than a warning. Karen tried one last time. Sheriff, this is for the community. Jake's being unreasonable. Grandpa stepped closer, towering over her. Ma'am, the only unreasonable thing here is you breaking into my grandson's barn. Now move. They moved. The caterers grabbed what was left of their trays. The DJ hauled his speakers out faster than you believe. Karen, muttering under her breath, stormed to her SUV, Carl trailing like a whip dog. The balloons were left tangled in the fence, a sad reminder of their failed party. Grandpa stayed until they were all gone, then checked the barn. The horses were fine, munching hay like nothing had happened. He called me, leaving a voicemail I get later. Jake, your barn's secure. Had to run off some HOA folks. Call me when you get this. Meanwhile, I was at Grandpa's place, grilling steaks and laughing over old stories. My phone was off, tucked in my bag. I had no idea the chaos that had just gone down. But when I checked it later that evening, I had a dozen missed calls. Most from Karen, a few from unknown numbers. Her voicemails were pure gold. Jake, your horses ruined everything. This is sabotage. You'll hear from our lawyers. I grinned, listening to her screech. Sabotage? Nah, I just secured my property and went to visit family. If Karen thought she could bully her way onto my ranch, she just learned a hard lesson. And with Grandpa Amos as the sheriff, she wasn't going to wiggle out of this one. Sunday afternoon rolled around, and I was driving back to my ranch, my truck humming along the Texas highways. The bed was loaded with a cooler of fresh steaks from Grandpa's place and a few tall tales we'd swapped over the weekend. George Strait was still crooning on the radio, and I was feeling good, relaxed, like a man who'd spent 2 days grilling, laughing, and not thinking about the HOA. My phone had been off most of the trip, but when I powered it up at gas station, it lit up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls, voicemails, texts, most from Karen, a few for numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't listen yet. I figured I'd deal with it when I got home. As I turned onto my road, the first signs of trouble came into view. My gravel driveway looked like a demolition derby had rolled through. Tire tracks crisscrossed the dirt, deep ruts where someone, probably Karen's SUV, had peeled out in a hurry. A string of sad, deflated balloons was tangled in my fence, flapping in the breeze like the ghosts of her gala dreams. Near the barn, I spotted a single, lonely folding chair tipped over in the grass. Looked like someone left in a panic. I parked my truck and stepped out, stretching my legs. The air was warm, the kind of Texas heat that makes you appreciate a cold beer. Everything seemed quiet. Too quiet, maybe. Then I noticed it, a prime mark on the ventilation shutter above the barn side door. Fresh scratches, wood splintered. My blood heated up a notch. They hadn't just trespassed. They damaged my property. Before I could get too worked up, I saw a sheriff's truck parked down the road, half hidden by some mesquite trees. I grinned. Grandpa. Of course, he'd keep an eye on things after the chaos. I gave a wave, and he pulled up, his Stetson casting a shadow over his weathered face. Jake, he said, stepping out, his boots crunching on the gravel. Had a bit of excitement while you were gone. Figured as much, I said, nodding at the balloons. Care to fill me in? Grandpa leaned against his truck, arms crossed, and gave me the rundown. How old Mr. Jenkins called the station about trespassers in my barn. How Grandpa rolled up to find Karen and her HOA crew in a full-blown panic, surrounded by my horses. Blaze had spooked them with a neigh. Thunder had knocked over a table, and Karen was screaming about sabotage while her caterers fled. Grandpa's voice stayed calm, but I could see the twinkle in his eye. He'd enjoyed putting the fear of Texas law into them. They pried open that shutter, he said, pointing, forced their way in after you locked up. I told him they were trespassing, made him clear out. Gave him a warning, but Jake, you've got ground to press charges if you want. Breaking and entering ain't a small thing. I nodded, running my hand over the splintered wood. Thanks, Grandpa. I'll handle it from here. He tipped his hat. You need me, you call. I ain't retired yet. He climbed back in his truck and drove off, leaving me to survey the scene. I walked to the barn, unlocked the padlock, and slid the heavy doors open. The horses blinked at me. Calm as could be, Blaze snorted like he was saying, You missed the show. The barn was mostly fine. Hay scattered, a few broken streamers on the floor, and a sad pile of squash sandwiches in the corner. Belle was still nibbling on a piece of glittery ribbon. I laughed, gave her a pat, and checked the others. All good. My horses had done their job, even if they didn't know it. I pulled out my phone and finally listened to Karen's voicemails. Oh, they were something else. Her first one was pure fury. Jake Thompson, your animals ruined our gala. This is deliberate sabotage. You'll hear from our lawyers. The next one, she was practically shrieking. There are horses in here. People are terrified. You need to get here now. By the third, she sounded unhinged, ranting about community standards and legal action. I saved everyone. Evidence, like Grandpa taught me. I was still chuckling when Mabel called. Jake, you should have seen it, she said, her voice brimming with glee. Karen was red as a tomato, screaming at those poor horses like they'd personally insulted her. And when your grandpa showed up, Lord, I thought she'd faint. She kept trying to argue, but he shut her down. Told her she was lucky he didn't haul her to jail. Mabel's play-by-play painted a vivid picture. The HOA crew, in their fancy clothes, dodging horse manure. Karen waving her clipboard like a weapon. Carl tripping over his own feet, trying to help. And Grandpa, standing tall, laying down the law. I thanked Mabel and promised to bring her some of my homemade peach preserves as a thank you for her intel. But the real fun started the next day. Word of the barn fiasco spread through Silver Spur Estates like wildfire. By a Monday morning, the community mailboxes were buzzing. Mabel, bless her heart, was there, giving a detailed account to anyone who'd listen. Karen broke into Jake's barn, she told Mrs. Carter, who'd had her own run-ins with Karen over her unapproved rose bushes. Pried open a shutter, let herself in, and got run off by his horses and the sheriff. Mrs. Carter spread it to her book club. Mr. Jenkins told his poker buddies. By lunchtime, half the subdivision knew Karen had made a fool of herself, and the other half, they heard it by dinner. The HOA's newsletter, which usually preached Karen's gospel of community standards, was suddenly silent. No follow-up, no apology, no nothing. I decided to poke the bear a little. I sat down and wrote a letter to the HOA board, CCing my cousin Ellie, who's a lawyer and does pro bono work for family when things get messy. The letter was polite but firm. On date, the Silver Spur HOA trespassed on my private property, damaged a ventilation shutter, and attempted to hold an unauthorized event in my barn. This was done despite my explicit refusal, documented in a voicemail on date. I request immediate compensation for the damage and a public retraction of the newsletter announcement. Any further attempts to access my property will result in legal action. I included a bill for the shutter repair, about $50 in materials, and a small fee for a vet check to ensure the horses weren't stressed. It wasn't about the money. It was about making a point. Actions have consequences, and Karen needed to learn that. I mailed the letter and waited. Tuesday morning, I got a call from Mr. Harris, a retired farmer who's lived in the area longer than I have. He's one of the few in Silver Spur who doesn't bow to Karen's reign. Jake, he said, chuckling, you stirred up a hornet's nest. Karen's been dodging questions all day. Folks are mad. They're calling for a special HOA meeting to talk about her leadership. I grinned. They should. She broke into my barn. Harris. Oh, we know, he said. Mabel's made sure of that. You coming to the meeting? It's Thursday. Nah, I said. I've got horses to tend. But let me know how it goes. Thursday night. Mabel called again, barely containing her excitement. Jake, it was a bloodbath. Karen walked in like she owned the place, but folks weren't having it. Mrs. Carter stood up and asked why the HOA was breaking into private property. Mr. Jenkins brought up the ladder theft. Even Carl tried to say he had concerns, but everyone laughed him off. Karen was sweating. Jake, sweating. Apparently, Karen tried to spin it, claimed it was a miscommunication, that she thought I'd come around to the idea. But the residents weren't buying it. Someone pulled out a copy of the newsletter, pointing to the bolded Thompson barn announcement. Another asked why the HOA was risking a lawsuit. By the end, there were calls for Karen's resignation. Carl, tried to save face, mumbled something about reviewing procedures. Mabel said Karen left the meeting red-faced, her perfect bob looking a little less perfect. The board didn't vote her out that night, but the cracks were showing. Her power was slipping, and she knew it. Back at the ranch, I was getting back to normal. Fed the horses, fixed the shutter, and cleaned up the last of the HOA's mess. I found a smashed cupcake under a hay bale, which made me laugh. The horses got extra oats for their role as unintentional bouncers. But I wasn't done. I installed a security camera pointed right at the barn door. Not because I expected Karen to try again. She wasn't that stupid, but because I wanted peace of mind, and maybe a little extra evidence, just in case. By Friday, I got a response from the HOA. A check for the shutter repair and the vet fee, tucked inside a curt letter. We apologize for the misunderstanding regarding the use of your property. No signature, but I knew it was from Karen, probably typed through gritted teeth. I cashed the check and framed the letter. A little trophy for the barn. The neighborhood was different after that. Folks who'd been scared to cross Karen started speaking up. Mrs. Carter painted her mailbox bright purple, daring the HOA to complain. Mr. Jenkins started parking his old tractor in his front yard, just because he could. Karen's SUV wasn't cruising by my place anymore, and Carl's sedan was nowhere to be seen. But I knew Karen wasn't done. She was too stubborn to quit. I figured she'd try one last power play to save face. And I was right. The week after the barn fiasco was deceptively calm. My horses Blaze, Thunder, Star, Rusty, and Belle were grazing happily, oblivious to their role as HOA bouncers. I'd fixed the pried-open shutter, cashed the HOA's check for the repairs, and hung their apology letter on the barn wall like a badge of honor. The new security camera blinked steadily, keeping watch over the driveway. Life on my 10-acre ranch felt normal again. But I knew Karen too well. She wasn't the type to slink away quietly. Sure enough, trouble started brewing by Wednesday. Mabel, my trusty neighbor and gossip queen, called me up. "Jake, you need to hear this," she said, her voice low, like she was spilling state secrets. "Karen's been telling folks at the community center that you endangered the gala with your horses. Says she's got a plan to set things right and make you regret it." I leaned back in my porch chair, sipping coffee. Regret it? She broke into my barn. Mabel. "Oh, she's spinning it," Mabel said. Claims the HOA had implied permission because of the newsletter. Says she's calling an emergency meeting to address your noncompliance with community standards. I laughed. Noncompliance? I'm not even in the HOA. Try telling her that, Mabel said. She's handing out flyers. Jake wants everyone their Friday night. I thanked Mabel and hung up, shaking my head. Karen was doubling down, trying to paint me as the villain to save her crumbling reputation. I wasn't worried. Not really. I had Grandpa, the law, and a barn full of evidence on my side. But I wasn't about to let her spread lies unchecked. Thursday morning, I found one of Karen's flyers stuffed in my mailbox. It was printed on bright pink paper, because of course it was. Emergency HOA meeting addressing community safety concerns, it read. Below that, in smaller print, discussion regarding unauthorized livestock hazards and non-cooperative property owners. Subtle. Karen. Real subtle. I call my cousin Ellie, the lawyer. "You see this nonsense?" I asked, reading her the flyer. Ellie snorted. "She's trying to rally the troops. Probably wants to slap you with some fake fine or resolution to pressure you. Send me the flyer, your voicemail log, and those photos of the shutter damage. I'll draft something to shut this down." By Thursday afternoon, Ellie had a letter ready. It was a masterpiece, polite, professional, and sharp as a spurs. Addressed to the HOA board, it reiterated that my property was private, not subject to their rules, and that their trespassing had already violated Texas law. It mentioned the sheriff's warning, my documented refusal, and the fact that I'd reserved the right to pursue legal action for damages and harassment. Any further attempts to misrepresent Mr. Thompson's actions or impose unauthorized penalties, Ellie wrote, will be met with appropriate legal measures. I mailed it to the HOA office with a copy to every board member's address I could find. Just for good measure, I emailed a PDF to the HOA's public contact, which I knew Karen checked. Let her stew on that before her big meeting. Friday came, and I stayed home. No sense wading into Karen's circus. I had a fence to mend and horses to feed. But Mabel, bless her, went to the meeting with a notepad and a gleam in her eye. She called me afterward, barely able to speak through her laughter. "Jake, you missed a show. Lay it on me," I said, settling onto the porch with a beer. Mabel launched into the story. The community center was packed, more people than any HOA meeting in years. Karen stood at the front, her pink dress matching her flyer, clutching a gavel like she was judge and jury. Carl was beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. She started with a speech about community safety and upholding standards, then zeroed in on me. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "deliberately endangered our gala by locking dangerous livestock in a venue we'd reserved. His actions put residents at risk and disrupted a cherished community event." Mabel said the room got quiet. Then Mrs. Carter, the Rose Bush rebel, stood up. "Karen, you broke into his barn. How's that his fault?" Karen sputtered. "We had permission. The newsletter you printed after he said no." Mr. Jenkins cut in, holding up a copy. "I've known Jake 20 years. He don't lie. You trespassed." The crowd murmured. Karen tried to pivot, waving her flyer. "This is about safety. Those horses could have hurt someone." That's when Mr. Harris, the retired farmer, stood up. "Lady, you ever been around horses? They don't attack unless you provoke them. You broke into a man's barn, scared his livestock, and you're blaming him?" Mabel said the room erupted. Some clapping, some shouting questions. Karen's face went from pink to purple. Carl tried to back her up, mumbling about community expectations, but someone yelled, "You stole my ladder." That got a laugh, and Carl shrank in his seat. Then came the kicker. Mrs. Carter, who'd gotten a copy of Ellie's letter from a board member, stood again. "I've got something to share," she said, pulling out the letter. She read it aloud, line by line, detailing the trespassing, the sheriff's warning, and the threat of legal action. By the time she finished, the room was dead silent. Karen tried to interrupt. "That's just his lawyer cousin trying to intimidate us." But the damage was done. A newer resident, a quiet guy named Tom who'd moved in last year, stood up. "Karen, you told us this event was approved. You lied. And now we're all at risk of a lawsuit because of you." Mabel said it was like watching a dam break. People started shouting, demanding answers. Why had Karen ignored my refusal? Why was the HOA wasting money on legal threats? Someone even asked how much the gala cost, since the budget was already tight. Karen's gavel was useless against the chaos. Finally, Mr. Harris proposed a motion. "I move we vote on a no-confidence measure against Karen as president. Her actions endangered us all." The room exploded again. Cheers, a few boos, and Karen screaming, "This is outrageous." But the board, sensing the tide, called for a vote. Mabel said it wasn't even close. Over 2/3 raised their hands for no confidence. Karen was out, effective immediately. Carl, trying to save himself, stood up. I had concerns from the start." That got more laughs, and someone yelled, "Sit down." Carl. The board appointed Mrs. Albright, a retired schoolteacher with a no-nonsense attitude, as interim president. Her first act was to promise a full review of the HOA's bylaws, especially around interactions with non-members. Mabel said the crowd cheered louder for that than for Karen's ousting. When Mabel finished, I was grinning ear to ear. "Sounds like justice," I said. "Oh, it's better than that," Mabel replied. Karen left in tears. Her SUV peeled out so fast she nearly hit a mailbox. I spent the next day checking on the ranch. The horses were fine, though Blaze gave me a look like he knew he'd done good. I found a few more remnants of the gala, a crushed paper plate, a glittery streamer stuck in a fence post. I tossed them in the trash, shaking my head. Karen's big plan had crashed and burned, and she'd taken herself down with it. But I got one last surprise. Monday morning, a certified letter arrived from the HOA. Inside was a formal apology signed by Mrs. Albright, acknowledging the trespassing and promising it wouldn't happen again. They'd also included a check for $200 covering the shutter, the vet fee, and additional inconvenience. I didn't need the extra, but I cashed it anyway. Figured it'd buy some new tack for the horses. I called Ellie to thank her. "You scared him good," I said. She laughed. "Just doing my job, cousin. You need me to sue him for real? You let me know." "Nah," I said. "I think they've learned their lesson." Life on the ranch settled down after that. Mrs. Carter painted her mailbox purple, and no one said a word. Mr. Jenkins parked his tractor front and center, daring the HOA to complain. The neighborhood felt lighter, like a weight had lifted. Karen's SUV was nowhere to be seen, and Carl kept a low profile. The weeks after Karen's ousting were like a cool breeze after a Texas heat wave. My 10-acre ranch felt like mine again. The horses blaze. Thunder, Star, Rusty, and Belle grazed under the live oaks, their tails swishing in the morning sun. The barn was back to normal. No more smashed sandwiches or glittery streamers. My new security camera kept a quiet watch, its red light blinking like a reminder. Don't mess with a rancher's property. Silver Spur Estates was different too. Mrs. Albright, the new interim HOA president, was a breath of fresh air. A retired schoolteacher with a sharp mind and a kind heart. She didn't have time for petty power plays. Her first newsletter, printed on plain white paper. Not Karen's signature pink, promised transparency, respect for private property, and a focus on actual community needs like fixing the potholes in the subdivision's roads. Neighbors started calling it the post-Karen era, and you could feel the relief in the air. I was out mending a fence one morning when Mabel, my gossip-loving neighbor, stopped by with a plate of her famous pecan cookies. "Jake," she said, her eyes twinkling, "you become a legend around here. Folks are still talking about Karen's barn disaster." I took a cookie, grinning, just doing what any rancher would. "Mabel, protecting what's mine." "Oh, it's more than that," she said. "You took down Queen Karen. Mrs. Carter's got her purple mailbox. Jenkins is parking his tractor wherever he wants. And I heard Tom's planting a cactus garden that'd make the HOA's old rules book cry." I laughed. Sounds like Silver Spur's getting some character back. Mabel leaned in, lowering her voice. "Karen's been quiet, though. Too quiet. Rumor is she's plotting something. Maybe a comeback." I shrugged, brushing dirt off my hands. "Let her try. She's got no power now, and Grandpa's still got his badge." Mabel nodded, satisfied, and headed home. But her words stuck with me. Karen wasn't the type to fade away. I kept my eyes open, just in case. A few days later, I got a call from Mr. Harris, the retired farmer who'd helped push the no-confidence vote. "Jake," he said, "thought you should know. Karen's been emailing some of the board members, trying to get them to reconsider her removal. Says the vote was unfair, and she's got new evidence to clear her name." "New evidence?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "What? A forged permission slip for my barn?" Harris chuckled. "Something like that. She's claiming you misled the community about your intentions, made it seem like you'd agreed to the gala. She's even hinting at a lawsuit against you for defamation." I roll my eyes. "She's got nothing. I've got voicemails, photos, and a sheriff for a grandpa." "Exactly," Harris said. "Mrs. Albright's not buying it, but Karen's making noise. Thought you'd want a heads up." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a mix of amusement and irritation. A lawsuit? Karen was grasping at straws, but I wasn't about to let her stir up more trouble. I called Ellie, my lawyer cousin, and filled her in. "She's bluffing," Ellie said, her voice calm but firm. "No judge in Texas would touch this. She trespassed, damaged your property, and got called out by the sheriff. But just to be safe, let's send a cease and desist letter. Shut her down before she gets any ideas." Ellie drafted the letter that afternoon. It was short, sweet, and sharp as a tack. To Ms. Karen Pinter, it began, "You are hereby directed to cease all defamatory statements and baseless legal threats against Mr. Jake Thompson. Any further actions will be considered harassment and addressed accordingly." It referenced the trespassing, the sheriff's warning, and my documented refusal, with a copy sent to the HOA board for good measure. I mailed it to Karen's address and emailed it to her personal account, which I'd gotten from the HOA's old contact list. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one. But the rumors stopped. No more emails to the board. No more new evidence nonsense. Karen's comeback attempt fizzled before it could start. Meanwhile, life on the ranch was good. I spent my days with the horses, training Blaze for a local show and fixing up an old tractor I'd been restoring. The security camera caught nothing but squirrels and the occasional hawk. Neighbors started waving more, stopping by to chat about the weather or share a beer. Mrs. Carter brought over a cutting from her rose bushes, and Mr. Jenkins offered to lend me his stolen ladder if I ever needed it. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange when Grandpa Amos pulled up in his sheriff's truck. He'd been in town for a meeting and decided to swing by. "Heard you've been keeping the peace," he said, settling into a chair with a cold soda. I said. "Karen's gone quiet. Think she's finally learned her lesson?" Grandpa chuckled, his eyes crinkling. "Folks like her don't learn easy. But she knows better than to mess with a Thompson now. You did good, Jake. Kept your head, secured your property, and let her dig her own grave." I grinned. "Couldn't have done it without you, Sheriff." He waved a hand. "Just doing my job. But I'll tell you, running those city folks out of your barn was the most fun I've had in years." We laughed, clinking our drinks as the crickets started chirping. The ranch felt like a sanctuary again, a place where I could work, live, and breathe without someone trying to turn it into their Instagram backdrop. A week later, Mrs. Albright invited me to an HOA meeting, not as a member, but as a guest. "We're revising the bylaws," she said over the phone. "Want your input, since you're the reason we're doing it." I wasn't keen on sitting through a meeting, but I went out of respect for her. The community center was less tense than Mabel's stories of the last one. No pink flyers, no gavel-wielding Karen. Mrs. Albright ran things like a classroom, calm but firm. She laid out new rules. No events on private property without written consent. No misleading newsletters, and a clear line between HOA land and non-members like me. Mr. Harris stood up and suggested naming the rule after me, the Thompson Property Clause. The room laughed, and I waved it off, embarrassed but flattered. "Just keep it fair," I said. "That's all I ask." Mrs. Albright nodded. "Fair's the goal. Jake, we're done with the old ways." Karen wasn't there, and neither was Carl. Rumor had it he'd stepped down from the board, too humiliated to show his face. The meeting ended with plans for a real community event, a barbecue in the actual community park, not my barn. I offered to bring some of my homemade brisket, and the room cheered. As I drove home, I felt a weight lift. The HOA wasn't perfect, but it was heading the right direction. Silver Spur was starting to feel like a neighborhood again, not a battleground. A month later, I heard Karen had put her house on the market. Mabel, of course, had the scoop. "She's moving to Dallas," she said, handing me another plate of cookies. "Says she's done with small-town drama." Good riddance. I didn't celebrate, but I didn't mourn either. Karen had made her bed. Pink, probably, and now she had a line at somewhere else. Her SUV was gone. Her reign was over, and my ranch was mine again. The story of the barn invasion became a local legend, told at barbecues and over beers at the feed store. "You hear about Jake Thompson's horses?" folks would say, laughing. Ran the HOA right out of his barn, with the sheriff to finish the job. I didn't mind the attention, though I'd rather talk about my horses than Karen's meltdown. Blaze took first place at the county show, and I was working on breaking in a new colt. The ranch kept me busy, and that's how I liked it. I added one more security camera, just for peace of mind. The horses got a new water trough, paid for with the HOA's inconvenience money. And every now and then, Grandpa would stop by, his Stetson tilted just right, ready to swap stories about the time we put the HOA in its place. Looking back, it was absurd. The audacity of Karen thinking she could waltz on my ranch, the chaos of her gala crashing down, the look on her face when Grandpa showed up. It was like a bad comedy, but it taught a serious lesson. Property is property, and no amount of pink flyers or HOA newsletters can change that. In Texas, you don't mess with a man's land, especially when his grandpa's the sheriff. So that's the story, folks. A locked barn, 5 horses, and a whole lot of justice. If you've got your own tales of standing up to overzealous HOAs or defending what's yours, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you enjoyed this slice of Texas life, hit that like button and share with your friends. Here's to open ranges, clear boundaries, and neighbors who know better than to cross them.